So you want to make a 3D FPS camera controller in a couple minutes with a dashing mechanic. As you can see, I can press and I can dash around. If you want to make this in a couple minutes, let's get straight to it. So we're first going to want to set up our player. A very simple setup with a collision shape, a head. Just move it up a bit from the middle. Camera, set it to current, play around with the variables on the right. We have a position 3D. You don't really need it, or you can also use a crosshair, which is a sprite 3D, which is just a Godot icon with a simple unshaded, no depth test material on it. Onto the player script, we just have a bunch of variables which will help us move the player around. We need all of these in order for it to work. In our ready function, we're going to make sure we set the mouse mode to captured. In order to make sure we can look around in our world with our 3D FPS player, we're going to be using the input function. We're going to be taking this event. We're going to be able to get a property called event.relative, which basically tells us how far the mouse was from its previous location or previous frame. And we're going to be able to rotate the head and the player on specific axes based on the event.relative. And you can multiply it by the mouse sense variable in order to make it a little bit more controllable. In our physics process function, we're not doing a whole lot. We're basically going to be saying velocity is going to be equal to a get direction function, which I'll explain in a second, and we're rotating it on the y-axis essentially, and we're basically going to be rotating it by where we're looking at, multiplying by a speed because this by itself is very slow, as it will become apparent when we look at the get direction function. And if we are not on the floor, we're going to be adding to our y speed a gravity amount, and else if we are on the floor, we're going to make sure we're not being pushed down by gravity, and we're going to be setting our dash and jump numbers to 0 because we want the dash and jump to be reset when we hit the ground. Speaking of dashing and jumping, if we're going to press the spacebar and our jump number is less than the maximum jump amount, we're going to call the jump function, which I'll get to. To dash, we're going to be doing something very similar to jumping, which is when we press that button, we're going to check if our dash number is less than our maximum dash amount, and we're going to dash forward. And then if you want to add camera rotations, you can. Just be very careful. Make sure you do not rotate the same axes that you do in the input function, because that will cause some very bad issues. Make sure you rotate it different parts. You can rotate the same part, but make sure it's a different axis. As you can see over here, we're rotating Z. In the input function, we were rotating X. This is very important because if you're linear interpolating between an angle for a camera to lerp to, then you'll be able to get that smooth head waving motion going from left to right or forward to backward. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is if you want to be able to have that slight camera tilt when you go forwards and backwards, left and right, you need to have these two lines in. And then in order for our dash to work, we're going to have to work with the extra velocity, and we're going to make sure we add friction to it. We're going to set our velocity.y equal to our y speed because I just find it easier to separate the y velocity on its own variable by itself, and then setting back the velocity.y to that y variable. And we're going to also add our extra velocity to our base velocity, and then we're going to move and slide by that velocity after everything has been added and modified to it. However, there are quite a few things missing from this, which is get direction. In our get direction function, we're basically going to be saying we're going to be making this variable called direction. We're going to be getting our UI right minus UI left, which is just the WASD, which you can define in the input map of the project settings input map, and it's defining UI left, UI right by going over here, clicking that button, and defining it for each one of them. UI down being S, UI up being W, and then over here we have the angle for camera to lerp to. And this is basically where we're setting these variables. You can play around with these variables to get a better understanding of them. As you can see over here, you can just print them out and understand. And we're going to be returning a direction.normalize, which is also what this means. We're going to be returning a vector3, which is our direction. And we're going to be plugging in get direction, or that direction I was talking about over here. We have our jump, which is very simple. The jump function is essentially just us adding 1 to the jump number because we've jumped once, and we're going to be setting y speed equal to jump strength. The dash forward, which is when we press F, is going to be very simple. It's going to be a very simple system similar to the jump system where we have +1 to the jump number, +1 to the dash number. But over here we have this extra line, which is if we are falling down because the sign of our y speed is -1, which means we're falling downwards, we're going to just set the y speed equal to 0. You don't need this. It's not mandatory. I just find it very cool. If I'm falling down and I dash, I break my fall. That's if you want to put it in. And then we're going to have to put this extra long line in to make sure our extra velocity, which is the way we're going to dash, and you can do other things with it. You can also add gun knockback with the extra velocity, but essentially this extra velocity is going to be equal to our sprite 3D's global transform.origin minus the camera's global transform.origin. That essentially allows us to get a vector pointing in this direction, and it is unaffected by the rotation or the direction you're looking in. At the beginning of the video, I said you don't need the position 3D. You can use the crosshair, but if you don't have a crosshair, then you can just put some small something in front of the camera, and make sure it is also the child of the camera. When I say it's the child of the camera, make sure it's underneath the camera over here with this line over here, because that's important for it to work properly. Other than that, this is a very simple tutorial. If you want the full in-depth every single line explained, I have a longer much longer video explaining that, but I felt that was too long, so I wanted to make a shortened down version for anyone who wanted to get the nitty gritty basics down really quick. So that's all I really have to say. Have an amazing day.